Hello, I'm just continuing on with this plane build. I had to make a few changes, probably nothing significant enough that you're going to be able to notice it just by glancing at this picture here. So I'll show you the changes as we go along. But the first one I'm going to look at is this kind of lumpy bit in the middle of the wing. So this plane is actually going to have a fuselage of sorts now, because my first plan, or initial plan, was to have the flight controller and everything down here, and that is easy to access and so on. And the wing was just going to be just a wing and nothing there. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to have all the wiring central point here, because otherwise you're going to have like a bunch of wires coming up here somehow, and the ESC needs to get power from the battery up there as well. So there's going to be a lot of wires going up and down here. But I figured if I could put the flight controller and obviously motor and ESC, everything all up in the middle there together, the only wire that needs to come down here is to the battery, and eventually to the FPV camera that you're going to put on the nose. So that's what I'm doing for this this first section here. I decided to slap a piece of 5cm foam on each side of the middle spine rib piece, like that. And I've taken it from this point here and just sort of smoothed it back with the airflow, hopefully like that. But that gives me quite a significant extra piece of space there. So that's what it looks like from the front. Yeah, so here's the rib where it would normally have been, and when I sand it off, of course you can't, I didn't really want it to come at straight flat like that because it just offended my sensibilities, so I sanded it all nice and smooth like this. But there you can see how much extra space we've got vertically by doing this. And one of the main points of making this so wide, you might have been thinking it's wider than it needs to be, but I wanted to be able to put a 36mm square flight controller like that on one side. So then I filled that up with the lightweight putty stuff, put a piece of packing tape on top just to cover that hole in the middle, sanded that all nice and smooth, and then covered that with glass, quite a bit of glass actually. I erred on the heavy side because the whole top section is going to be cut out later, so this is not really going to be giving it any strength, but I wanted to keep these vertical walls fairly strong. So this is how the central box fuselage thing section is looking at this point. Turned out pretty nice actually, but as usual, rather heavy, almost 300 grams here with the foam inside. Of course I'm going to take the foam out, so it will not be quite that heavy when it's done. But I used 50 gram glass on the last layer, so you can see it's turned out nice and smooth and quite sleek actually on there. And also on the bottom, 50 gram for the last level again. It's almost perfectly flat here. So my thinking is that I'll be screwing the flight controller onto this bottom deck. Hopefully the glass itself will be thick enough. If it's not, I might have to reinforce it with a bit of plywood, which would kind of suck, but may have to be done. The bottom deck is not really stuck very securely onto the central pole. You may be able to see there, the glass doesn't go all the way in, and it's kind of dry there. There's nothing really connecting it, but I'm hoping that the rest of the structure, all being quite strong, will be enough to hold it in place while I'm digging the foam out, and then I'll probably have to come back and put a little bit of epoxy microspheres reinforcing this join here, but from the inside, not necessarily from the outside. So the whole box holds together by having the glass from the top wrap around a bit onto the plywood at the side here, about halfway down. And on the bottom, the connection again is not very strong. It's just the glass here to the plywood, just that the thickness of the plywood there is holding it together there. So for that joint, I think I might again have to come back and put a little bit of epoxy and microspheres reinforcing along this joint on the inside, of course. But other than that, it's looking quite good. There's quite a bit of volume in there now, so I'm not having any worries about being able to fit my flight controller and all the wiring and GPS and receiver and all the bits and pieces that have to go in there. Should be no problem at all. And it hasn't really cost me too much in the way of airflow impedance, because the wing was going to be this high anyway, so the only airflow cost that it's causing is this little sort of bit here that wouldn't have been here originally on each side there. Motor mounted plate is fine. It all fits in nice and smooth and sort of blunt rounded on the front, which is good. So the next step, I haven't really thought about this too much, because this This whole thing was not part of the original plan, by the way, just in case that wasn't clear from earlier. But I'm going to have to cut a hatch open on the top here like that, something like that. Oh yeah, no problem. It's going to be slow though. Well, that worked beautifully. I was thinking that I was going to be sitting there for ages doing this, but it seems to be one of those things that once you get the hang of it, goes pretty quick, and I don't think I spent much more than about 10 minutes cutting out there. It's a bit wobbly because I was just sort of doing it freehand. But my next challenge is going to be how to get this off, because although I did put one strip of packing tape down the middle here just to cover up that gap, see the dark line, that's just a cavity there. I didn't put any more packing tape around the place, and the glass is stuck to the foam directly, so it's going to be a hell of a job to get this off. I tried prying it a little bit there with screwdrivers, but I think I'm just going to break it if I try too hard. So unfortunately, I think I'm going to have to use acetone in this little gap here now to get the top off. I didn't really want to do that because I wanted to keep the foam in place so that I could sort of clamp this down and make some little tabs underneath it so that it would sit in there nicely later. So I sat there for a while with a screwdriver and a steel ruler poking around in here like a Neanderthal, and then I realized I have the perfect tool for this right here, hot wire. Oh, it's getting smelly. Oh, it stinks. Hope the smoke alarm doesn't go off, but it is working quite well. Oh, nice. Now watch this. Boop. Exactly what I wanted. So to make these tabs here, I folded over some little pieces of glass and wet them and stuffed as much of it as I could fit into that little cavity that I'd made there. And then before I put the lid on to squash it down, I put a little bit of wedge of foam under here, and if I was a bit smarter I would have put a piece of baking paper under here as well, because the foam obviously got stuck to the bottom of the tabs there. And that's the same at the rear, and then a piece of Glad wrap to stop it sticking to the lid, and then just squash the lid down and let it set. Hopefully this is just going to sit on there nicely now. It's a little bit loose side to side and back to front, but that's alright because I still have to put a attachment on the front here to stick under there. So by the time I've done that and then hold it down there as well with something, should be just right. So there were quite a few steps involved in making this, but it turned out quite nice, and I'm just going to flip through some more photos I have here. You can pause this if you want to look at them a bit more. And here I've put all the pieces as they were at that time together just to get a look at what it's going to look like. And the overall wingspan is increased by about 10 centimeters, so it's going to be about 1.92 meters. The extra width of that section in the middle meant that the position of these wing braces needed to be reconsidered a little bit, so I went back to my design program intending just to think about that, and I ended up changing quite a few other things fairly significantly. So what we're looking at here is on the left we have the old design, and on the right we have the new one, so hopefully you can sort of see a little bit clearer what's changed. And the main change is that the frame part has been enlarged quite a bit, and the battery is now no longer slung underneath the platform, main platform, it's up on top of it. And the landing gear has not changed in position, but its attachment point has changed. So what that means is that the landing gear itself has completely changed as well. So I completely redid the landing gear. I didn't like the previous version that much. It was a bit long and springy and soft. As a lot of people pointed out in the comments, it seemed that the consensus was that that was not going to work very well. And the other issue that really bugged me about this landing gear was the way that these pipes were going to fit in there. And once they're fit in there, this landing gear would never be able to come off, because it would be enclosed at each end by a solidly epoxied carbon tube going across like that. So it would never be able to move. It would never be able to remove, and more likely than not, never be able to move either, because there was very, very little clearance around these pipes, and it would have been a hell of a difficult thing to slide it up and down, backwards and forwards. So my new plan is do the whole thing again, and the significant difference that I'm going to make here is that the middle section, instead of having a curve all the way around like that, it's going to be completely flat through the middle, and that's going to make quite a few things easier. I'm also adding a little bit of a section to make it wider, or longer actually this is, as it goes underneath the longitudinal tubes of the main platform. So hang on, it'll become clear in a second. Anyway, this is all the glass and carbon that I used. So I used a little bit of carbon here. I wanted to use a little bit more, but I made a mistake with the scissors. What is it? Measure once, cut twice, or something like that. And I didn't have enough left to do quite what I wanted. But anyway, there's a little bit of carbon in there now. So these are the longitudinal bits that I was talking about, and this is just before I let it set. I put the aluminium plate on top here again to try and make this nice and flat. Oh, that's super soft. No. Well, it's very soft through the middle, but that might be alright, because it's straight, it'll be very easy to reinforce that with just like a little piece of wood or something. With the previous one being curved, it wasn't so easy, but this one shouldn't matter too much. But anyway, the point is, okay, so it's a lot stiffer around here than the last one was. Wow, I can't believe how flexy it is in the middle compared to here. And there's the same amount of carbon going through these two places, but the main difference is that there's 8 layers in the middle. See how there's like a half-width piece of glass in the middle there? There's 8 layers of that half-width piece through here on this curved section. And you can see it stops there, and there's none in the middle. So I'm thinking that's where all this strength is coming from. Anyway, I think this will be about right now, hopefully. So here's the new landing gear all done. I am going to have to put an aluminium cross brace here. For one thing, it'll stop this bowiness in the middle, because if it was too bowy, like without this cross brace, these aluminium clamps could probably turn on the pipe, and I really don't want that. And the other thing is that, in case it wasn't obvious, these connections here function as a sort of a cross brace for the main platform of the fuselage or the space frame part, because imagine that it's like a diagonal going from here to here and here to here. So it's sort of a cross brace like that. That's the point of it. But anyway, regarding this sort of a issue, there's still a little bit of a wobble there, but I think that's okay, because it goes away fairly quickly, and it just feels really quite nice now. So it's a bit early to say for sure, but I think I got it right this time. And as much as I can tell from, just doing this sort of a test, it feels pretty damn good. Now this part is not so nice, but don't worry about it, it'll be right. Now, as I mentioned, the other thing I changed was this frame. Well, I hadn't actually constructed any of the frame, so I wasn't really changing anything physically. I just changed the design before I started making it. And the difference is that it is now a couple of inches further down and 4 centimeters wider. So originally the longitudinal tubes here were 12 centimeters apart. Now they're 14. So the whole thing is just a bit broader, and it should provide a better base of support for this brace here, I think. And also, quite importantly, is that now it should comfortably fit a second mounting plate. I'm planning to try carrying a 3-axis gimbal on this, maybe. I don't know if I'll do it, but at least now I have the room to do it if I want to try that. I started constructing the frame by making a jig, or it's a jig, isn't it, I think, to make sure everything was going to be held securely and in the right place while glue was drying and so on. I I did these connections basically the same way as I did in my video from a few weeks ago where I did a test for this. There were quite a few suggestions in that video from people telling me how I could do various things better. But just given the materials I have here and from what I saw in that test, it seemed to be sufficiently strong. So I've done basically the same thing, except this time I've been very, very careful to sand everything properly and clean everything properly, in this case with acetone. I cleaned all these joints before I stuck them together. And further jig, is it a jig? I think it's a jig, isn't it? Whatever. So yeah, I hadn't really thought ahead to how all this was going to play out when I was sitting in front of my computer just dreaming about how cool this plane was going to be. Okay, here's this positioning jig, or whatever you want to call it. This is yet another one of these things that I wasn't really thinking about when I was looking at this on the computer screen designing it. Just sort of slipped my mind about how all this is going to have to be done, and it was kind of a pain in the butt to build, but now that I have it, it's quite convenient because I can just pick the whole thing up and move it somewhere else if I want to, let glue dry for a while and I want to use this bench for something, or if I just want to move it out to the garage to work on, which incidentally is exactly what I'm going to do now, because the next step is to sand the fish mouth on the pipes that are going to be going between here and here, and I can imagine this is going to be a fairly tedious process as well. There's quite a lot of tedious processes involved with this build. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about a whole lot of it before I started. But anyway, we're here now, so let's keep going. This is how I've been sanding the ends of the pipes. I just put a piece of tube of the right diameter covered by sandpaper in the vise here and hold this at the right angle, hopefully, and just rub it up and down on here for a while, quite a while actually. So it's not really what I would call fun, but eventually it gets there. Okay, I've finished sanding the ends of the connecting tubes into the shapes that they need to be, and I've just sanded off the ends there, and I'm cleaning them in preparation for gluing together, and also on some pieces on the frame itself like that. And normally I would use acetone to do this, but due to the close proximity to some of the places I wanted to clean like this to the polystyrene foam of the wings, I thought it would be a bit safer to use this, because I just happened to buy this yesterday and I'm really glad that it doesn't affect the foam, so that's isopropyl alcohol, and I thoroughly doused these two pieces of polystyrene here with it just as a test, and it doesn't do anything at all to the polystyrene, so that's really nice to learn. Here's another consequence of not really having a full plan and improvising partway through. So my intention was to connect these tubes so that they'd be lashed at the bottom like that, lashed around there with carbon fiber tow like I did in my test recently. The trouble is, the one at the bottom there will be fine, I can do that, but the one at the top, oops, where are we? Not quite right, but about there. Now obviously I can't lash around the top of the tube there because it's all obscured by the bottom of the fuselage, so in my original plan it wasn't going to be like that, and I would have been able to just lash this on the top as well. And I thought about maybe drilling a hole into the top, like just there, so that I could put a piece of wire around and drill a small hole in the end of this so that the wire could go through that as well. But it's just, I don't really want to do that either. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to tack them on, and then I'll probably put some epoxy microspheres around to build it up a bit, and then I'll put some carbon cloth over the top, and instead of being a nice compact joint, it's going to get quite bulky around here and also at the back there as well, but that will be better than having it falling apart, I think. Okay, well that's the main part of the frame all tacked together now, ready for lashing. I'll have to take it off this jig to do the lashing, but that wasn't too bad after all. It's like a lot of things, you get better at it as you go, and like a lot of things I find when I'm doing these planes, like you get good at it and then there's no more work to do. So by the time I got to the last pipe, I was doing it quite quickly, but then I was just finished. But anyway, yeah, like I said, it's just tacked there, but it seems to be holding in place, and all the work that I put in to make this jig paid off, because gluing everything in place was very, very simple and easy. No muss, no fuss, no problems at all. And it seems to be nice and straight as far as I can tell. Okay, so now that this is ready like this, the next step is to go around and lash all those joints that I can lash and build up these ones at that part properly, but that's going to have to be in the next video, I think. So thanks for watching, see you next time.